Good morning and welcome to your reading lesson today, Year 6. Today in our session, we're going to be thinking about Chapter 7 of Private Peaceful and continuing there. And we're going to summarise elements of the chapter and of passages in particular. And we're going to look at what a good summary would look like. We're also going to focus on some vocabulary. We are going to complete the chapter today, so we'll read through quite quickly. So I won't do as much description of the text as we go through as I've done in previous days. To be successful today, you are going to need to identify what part of a story is being referred to when you're asked a question in relation to summarising. So you're going to need to comprehend what's happened and the events within that story and that fact section. And you're going to need to follow the instruction for your question answer. So if you're asked to use three words, you don't use 8. Okay, basically. Now, guys, we're going to read pages through generally, but first of all, I'm going to revisit one we've already looked at. So almost squat is a phrase which is used within this text, and we can see it's just here, almost squat. Now, almost squat is a phrase which means, based on reading this, it says, in comparison, the church towers at home seem almost squat, hiding themselves away in the folds of the fields. So this is a section of text we've already read, and just to remember how we'd answer then the question of what does it mean if something is almost squat. What it means, if we're asked to define that, is that the phrase almost squat is mentioned on page 87, and this gives the context. So our answer would be that it's mentioned on page 87 in relation to the size of the church towers. The context is that our narrator, Tommy, is in France, and whilst looking around, comparing the location to memories of home, the phrase means very small and possibly wide. Okay, this is clear as he also describes British church towers as hiding themselves away. Okay, so he's mentioning that in Britain, the church towers, by comparison to the French ones, are really small, really tiny, and they're almost hiding themselves away. Okay, so we understand by the context what that vocabulary might mean. Now we're going to read through the upcoming pages, and as we do that, we'll highlight one section of text I'd like you to focus on the vocabulary for. As I say, though, I'm not going to talk too much about what's going on. So earlier on, we've got the idea of Charlie and his brother were at home. Tomo had been tempted to sign up, but hadn't signed up because he's too young anyway, so they've decided not to. A few weeks later, the Colonel paid Mother a surprise visit whilst Charlie and I were out at work. We didn't hear about it until we got home in the evening, and Molly told us. I thought something strange was going on, as Mother was usually preoccupied and quiet at supper. She wouldn't even answer Big Joe's questions. Then, when Molly got up saying she felt like a walk and suggested both Charlie and I came with her, I knew for sure something was up. It was a very long time since we've been out together, just the three of us. If Charlie had asked me, I'd have said no for sure. But it was always more difficult for me to refuse Molly. Okay, so you can still see that link between Tommy and Molly and how he'll do what she wants. We went down to the brook just like we'd done in the old days whenever we'd wanted to be alone together, where Molly and I had met up so often when I'd been their go-between postman when he'd been taking the letters between the two of them. Molly didn't tell us until we were sitting either side of her on the riverbank, until she had taken each of us by hand. I'm breaking a promise, she said, I made to your mother, she began. So it shows how important this event is. I so much don't want to tell you this, but I must. You have to know what's going on. He's a colonel. He came in and told her this morning. He said he was only doing what was his patriotic duty. See that phrase that reminds us of Wilfred Owen? His patriotic duty. He told us that the war was going badly for us, that the country was crying out for men. So he's decided that now is the time for every able-bodied man who lives or works on his estate, everyone who can be spared to volunteer, to go off to the war and do his bit for king and country. The estate will just have to manage without them for a while. I felt Molly's grip tighten on my hand and a tremor come into her voice. He said, you've got to go, Charlie, or else he won't let us stay in the cottage. Your mother protested all she could, but he wouldn't listen. We can see how serious it is this time compared to when she persuaded him to let them buy Bertha. He just lost his temper. He'll put us all out, Charlie, and he won't go on employing your mother or me unless you go. So Molly's almost pleading with the situation. He wouldn't do that, Moll. It's just a threat, Charlie said. He can't do it. He just can't. He would, Molly replied. And he can. So we can see how serious the situation's got. For this page, I'd like you to think about what patriotic duty means. You might want to compare that phrase to the words of Wilfred Owen and think about how he perceived this use of the word patriotic duty in these armchair patriots. Okay. He would, and he can. You know he can. When the Colonel gets it into his head to do something and he's in the mood to do it, he will. Look what he did to Bertha. Remember, he shot the dog. He means it, Charlie. The Colonel promised, I said, and his wife did too before she died. She said she wanted Mother looked after, and the Colonel said we could stay on in the cottage. Mother told us. Your mother reminded him of that, said Molly, replying. And do you know what he said? He said it'd never been a promise as such, only his wife's wish. And that anyway, the war had changed everything. He was making no exceptions. Charlie, you have to join up or we'll be out of the cottage at the end of the month. We sat there holding hands. Molly's head, which is always placed on people when there's serious points within the plot. Molly's head on Charlie's shoulder as evening fell around us. Molly was sobbing and quietly from time to time, but none of us spoke. We didn't need to. We all knew there was no way out of this, that the war was breaking us apart, and that all our lives would be changed forever. But at that moment, I treasured Molly's hand in mine, treasured this last time together. Suddenly, Charlie broke the silence. I'll be honest, Moll, he said. It's been bothering me a lot just lately. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to go, but I've seen the lists in the papers. You know, all the killed and the wounded. Poor beggars. Pages of them. It hardly seems right, does it? Me being here enjoying life while they're over here, over there. It's not all bad. And the phrase here is treasure. That verb to treasure. If you remember, it says he treasured Molly's hand in his. Oh, bad Mole. I saw Benny Copplestone yesterday. He was sporting his uniform up at the pub. He's back on leave. He's been a year or more in Belgium, he says, which is one of the other places where the fighting took place. Cushy, he called it. He said, we've got the Germans on the run now. One big push. You see this optimism in how Charlie's presenting the issue. One big push, he reckons, which means one big more attack. But remember how long the Somme went on for. Remember how little progress was made. One big push, he reckons, and they'll all be running back to Berlin with their tails between their legs, which means when they lose, if an animal goes with its tails between its legs, it shows it's been defeated. And then all our boys can come home. He paused, kissed Molly on the forehead. Anyway, looks like I've not got much choice, do I, Moll? Oh, Charlie, Molly whispered. I don't want you to go. Don't worry, girl, Charlie said. With a bit of luck, I'll be back to wet the baby's head, and Tomo will look after you. He'll be the man about the place, won't you, Tomo? And if that silly old fart of a colonel sticks his lousy head in our front door again while I'm gone, shoot the Tomo, like he shot Bertha. And I knew he was only half joking too. So this instruction Charlie's given to hurt the colonel if he comes round is a bit of a joke, but also not just hyperbole. He basically wants Tomo to defend his family. I don't believe I even thought about what I said next. I'm not saying, I'm not staying, I told them. I'm coming with you, Charlie. They both tried all they could to dissuade me. They argued, they bullied, but I would not be put off, not this time. I was too young, Charlie said. I said I was 16 in a couple of weeks and as tall as he was. That all I had to do was shave and talk deeper, and I could easily be mistaken for 17. Mother wouldn't let me go, Molly said. I said I'd run away, that she couldn't lock me up. So you see this sudden moment now. Tomo, inspired by the Sergeant Major, inspired by his brother, maybe feeling sad about how he's not as important to Molly as Charlie is, he decides to go. What does wet the baby's head mean, do you think? Where Charlie says he wants to get back in time to wet the baby's head. I think it's related to celebrating the birth of somebody. I don't think it's the idea of baptizing somebody. I think wet the baby's head might mean you celebrate in a way that they've been celebrating events earlier. Remember how they were befuddled when Tomo went somewhere. Where was that? And who'll be there to look after us if you both go? Molly was pleading with me now. Who would you rather I look after, Molly? I replied. All of you at home who can perfectly well look after yourselves, or Charlie, who's always getting himself into nasty scrapes, even at home? When they had no answer to that. So Tomo, the younger brother here, feels like it's his responsibility to make sure Charlie doesn't get in trouble. Because Charlie's mouth sometimes gets him in trouble, doesn't it? He got sacked by the colonel for stealing Bertha. Or Charlie, who's always getting himself into nasty scrapes, even at home. When they had no answer to this, I knew I'd won. They knew I'd won. And I knew it too. I was going to fight in the war with Charlie. Nothing and no one could stop me now. I've had 2 long years to think on why. So this is now our current writer, our narrator in current time, saying he's been away for 2 years from this conversation. To think on why I decided like that on the spur of the moment to go with Charlie. In the end, I suppose it was because I couldn't bear the thought of being apart from him. So even though they've split up because of Molly as best friends, he still can't envisage being apart from his brother. We lived our lives together always, shared everything, even our love for Molly. Maybe I just didn't want him to have this adventure without me. And then there was the spark in me, nearly kindled by those scarlet soldiers marching bravely at the high street in Haverley. The steady march on the feet, the drums and bugles resounding through the town, the sergeant major's sterling call to arms. Perhaps he had woken feelings in me I never realised I'd had before, and that I'd certainly never talked about. It was true that I did love all that was familiar to me. I loved what I knew, and what I knew was my family, and Molly and the countryside I'd grown up in. I did not want any enemy soldier ever setting foot on our soil, on my place. I would do all I could to stop him and to protect. And we'll read about it. So, on the spur of the moment, think about that context. Did he take a long time, or was it really quick? People I loved, and I would be doing it with Charlie. Deep down, though, I knew that more than Charlie, more than my country or the band or the sergeant major, it was that toothless old woman taunting me in the square. You ain't a coward, are you? You ain't a coward. That had inspired Tomo to make this choice. The truth was that I wasn't sure I wasn't a coward. I needed to find out. I had to prove myself. I had to prove myself to myself. 2 days later, 2 days of parrying, which means pushing away mothers and many attempts to keep me from going, we all went off together at Egglesford Junction Station, where Charlie and I were to catch the train to Exeter. Big Joe had not been told anything about us going off to war. We were going away for a while and would be back soon. We didn't tell him the truth, but we told him no lies either. Mother and Molly tried not to cry because of him. So did we. Look after Charlie for me, Tomo, Molly said, and look after yourself too. We could feel the swell of her belly, remember, she's pregnant, against me as we hugged. Mother told me to promise to keep clean, to be good, to write home and to come home. Then Charlie and I were on the train, the first train we'd ever been on in our lives, and we were leaning out the window and waving, only pulling back, spluttering and coughing when we were suddenly engulfed in a cloud of sooty smoke. When it cleared and we looked out again, the station was already out of sight. We sat down opposite each other. Thanks, Tomo, said Charlie. For what? I said. You know, he replied, and we both looked out the window. There was no more to say about it. A heron lifted off the river and flew away and accompanied us for a while before veering away from us and landing high in the trees. A startled herd of ruby red cows scattered as we passed by, tails high as they ran. Then we were in a tunnel, a long dark tunnel filled with din and smoke and blackness. It seemed like I'd been in the tunnel every day since. Charlie and I went rattling off to war. It all seems a very long time ago now, a lifetime. So you've got an example of your text answer for vocabulary. Now, summarising then, we've read this section already, 98 and 99. We've got these four options. Which is the best one, do you think? Well, let's go through with problems with each of them as we go through. So Molly does come to the boys in that section, and she does tell the boys what she doesn't tell them the colonel was going to join the war. So that's an error there. So reading the second one, told the boys the colonel was going to make them join the war. Third one, Molly told the boys the colonel was going to ask them. Which is it? It's not ask, is it? Molly told the boys the colonel had argued with their mother. That's true. Then we need to add that detail. It was about them going to the war. So that's a missing detail. So sometimes the summary isn't wrong, but the summary in that final box doesn't have enough information in. So therefore, it's not as good as the one in the blue box above it. Right, guys, thinking then. I don't know what the arrows are, but basically in these ones, guys, you've got these different summaries to make. So for pages 100 to 101, you've got four summaries to pick the best one from, and the same for 102 to 103. And then your final task is for the whole of chapter 7. Can you write down your own chapter summary? So this is where you need to be clear. Maximum 50 words, minimum 30 words. So between 30 and 50 words to summarize what's happened with Molly, with Charlie, Tommy, the soldiers, the woman. Try and summarize it in just 30 to 50 words, please. Thank you very much for listening. Sorry it was a bit rushed today. I just wanted to finish that chapter with you. See you soon, guys. Bye-bye.